Please join me in welcoming Professor Ashon Crawley.
Thank you for that introduction. I always get Twitter followers when I talk about serious things, which is like once a month. And then I say, when Scandal was a show that I watched, it's like, I mostly talk about Scandal, or now it's what? This Is Us is a show that makes me cry every week. So, but thank you for the introduction. I want to thank you all for being here today, not just to see me, but for the entire symposium. Is very exciting. I'm jet lagging, so I'm a little bit tired, but I'm just very excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Ricky, and to David and Fan for co-organizing this event. I'm just going to begin to talk about what the Lonely Letters is. In 2010, I fell in love, I thought, with a gentleman that I met in a city. Is this being recorded? Yeah. Somewhere in the world. And, it was a lovely time, thought it was the one. And I got back to Durham, North Carolina after visiting a certain city and started to send emails that were not being replied to. So I sent like 2 emails, I think that there's something here, and this person would not reply. And so I had all this stuff that I thought I wanted to say because it was the one, trademark. And because it was the one, I had all this stuff that I felt that I needed to say, and a friend of mine said, well, why don't you write to yourself, or write the email as if you were writing to this person, but send it to yourself, so you can say the thing that you want to say, but you don't have to actually badger this person, right? And if they respond to the first email that you finally sent, then you can begin to have this process of things that you've already written. Around about the 3rd email that I sent to myself, I realized I actually was not talking to this person anymore. I was really trying to figure out my own relation to loneliness, my relation to queerness, my relation to Black Pentecostalism, my relation to sound. And so it's a project that began in 2010. And if anyone's read Black Pentecostal Breath, The Aesthetics of Possibility, there are 4 of these letters in the actual text. And I've decided to actually not extend it, but to actually just make it its own project explicitly. And so it was at one time called Moth's Powder, and I'm describing it as an autobiofiction. So it's semi-autobiographical, it's also semi-fictional in certain parts. And it's really trying to explore those relationships between the concepts of loneliness and the concepts of blackness and the concepts of sound, but also very intensely trying to think about the concept of mysticism and the concept of renunciation and the concept of sociality. And so it's trying to cut across multiple genres and really trying to do a whole lot of things. And so thank you for being here. I hope it makes some sense. And it's an epistolary, so it's set in a email form, email sent to a character named Moth. Moth is a composite character, and it specifically draws on Nathaniel Mackey's work in From a Broken Bottle, Traces of Perfume Still Emanate. Reading that book the first time actually let me know that you could write about music in a certain kind of way. And so the work is paying homage to the space and the imagination that Nathaniel Mackey continues to make available to me. And so I'm thankful for his work too. The Lonely Letters. This is an excerpt. What I'm reading is an excerpt of the longer project. Dear Moth, what if it were possible to vibrate at the same speed and velocity as our favorite music and our favorite sound? What if we resonated the way Mahalia Jackson sort of wails and sways on Soul and How I Got Over?
I got over. How did I make it over? My soul back in wonder. How did I make it over?
Or what if it were possible to vibrate? What if it were possible to resonate the way Twinkie Clark does on a Black Pentecostal shout on the Hammond organ? What if we could just move and tremble and quiver and quake and spin and spin and spin until equilibrium is off and we slip into the sonic world? I watch The Flash a lot, even though I have to catch up on the episodes, but the show keeps intimating that if Barry could just vibrate at the same speed as what is presumed to be solid and impenetrable matter, that he could just slip into and through the matter itself. So what if we could do the same with music and with sound? Would we perhaps then evaporate into and be united with it? What would then be our mode of existence? What song or sound would you choose? I'd want to choose something that resonates with a simultaneity, spin and quiver and quake and be one with you. Withdraw into you and you withdraw into me. So yeah, what's the song? And also, I'd been meaning to ask you about mysticism because you said you went on a silent retreat and it made you think all kinds of things, that it was a mystical experience for you. So who are some of the folks you would suggest for me to read? Moving on. A. Dear Moth, it's been a while because I've been reading Meister Eckhart since you said I'd enjoy him. Interesting dude. You said, quote, stop thinking of being alone as lonely. Think about it as a moment to reconnect with your deepest self. Think about it as a chance to sit in silence and still, and to be still, and to breathe and to be. If you can think of being alone as a chance to hear God, then you'll be okay. Check out this Eckhart, end quote. But the more I read, the more I figure out why I have a sort of resistance to this shit, to silent retreats and things like that, why it makes me feel weird. The Eckhart and the other stuff I've been reading actually seems to be tied to particular traditions, to particular religious affiliations, and that kind of unsettles me. I'm not looking for a new age individuation of blessings and wealth and acquisition that discards the histories and practices from which certain mysticism emerge, but I guess I have the problem with mysticisms that I have with what I guess we could call imprecisely non-mystical traditions, if even such a thing exists. Mystical traditions, at least the Western ones, seem to rub up against their own delimitation, seem to only be able to go so far, seem to be only about the production of normative function and form. The limit, I guess, in Eckhart would be a kind of normative Christianity. And his aloneness, his negativity, his nothingness, all emerge from that limit, even if he is trying to approach something otherwise. Because for his experience to be about Christianity, such experience is against the very interconnectedness of all things mysticism presumes to seek. How, in other words, can I be connected to all things, and how can I be integrated as part of a whole, while remaining steadfast in a conviction about Jesus being the only way to the Father, for example? Some folks and some doctrines are much more dogmatic about there being only one path, whereas others, even in the same tradition, seem to be much more open and capacious and imaginative. I want to be like them, I guess. So yeah, I've been reading Eckhart and I think he's cool, but Eckhart assumes a certain theological world with a certain deity, Godhead, and a certain understanding of the human, a very particular understanding of immanence and transcendence. It's that particularity that is introduced that seems to produce an antagonism for other traditions, even in their mystical strains. Based on our conversations about this, it seems you think it's impossible or only New Age for mysticism to be devoid of a particular tradition. If that's the case, I'm unsettled. I'm thinking of Eckhart, but also Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, and Athanasius and Cassian and the Rule of Benedict. I'm even thinking of John of Ficamp, who says in his book Lament Over Lost Leisure and Solitude the following: it shames and horrifies me that I must appear in public assemblies, going into the city, talking to those in power, looking at women, mingling with the chattering masses, and enduring so many other things that pertain to the world. End quote. He's just one example, but think about it. He was an 11th century Benedictine monk, lamenting over the fact of lost leisure and lost solitude. What was lost was so because the social world had become too much for monks to pretend to be unencumbered by it. The social world made itself evident in the ways that monks had to alter the practice of their daily lives. For John of Ficamp, what was desired was leisure and solitude from the social world, from the noise of relationality, so much so that he lamented having to deal with the materiality of people, their funk, their voice, their breath. It's just hella Kantian before Kant, because wasn't Kant too also worried over the material fact of beggars on the street, the fact that beggars became too much for him, too numerous? And didn't Kant escape their noise because they were too much for him to engage? John of Ficamp gives a Kantian analysis of the transcendental aesthetic before Kant, or really perhaps models the sort of idea of the aesthetic to come. What intrigues me about all these folks is their desire for a vertical relationship with the Lord over and against all other kinds of relationships. How there is a sort of necessity to renounce sociality, how there was a retreat, how there was a movement away from noise. And so even when monks were called upon to recite the Psalms daily in communal prayer, the emphasis seemed to not be on the communal aspect, but on the regimentation of following the rule, of following the order, of inculcating obedience in the service of the creation of an individual, of a self, of a subject. Such an individual self and subject would be rational, would be higher than the base emotions and the base flesh. There was an assumption, a moving out from the flesh, of enunciation of the body to produce this vertical relationship. Living alone, ridding oneself of the appetites of the flesh as much as possible, retreating from the world into the desert. I've got no problem with renunciation, retreat, or movement. It's just the direction of such that worries me. And you wanted me to read this because you thought it helped me think about being alone or single and finding God. I don't know. I am thinking a lot, but more perturbed than anything else. I'll keep thinking. More soon. A. Dear Moth, here's a quote from this great essay about Ralph Ellison, Albert Einstein, and George Jackson. Quote, I was lonely and found these three lonely men. Oh, Ellison. To paraphrase myself, I love you, write me, I'm lonely. Dearest Einstein, his lonely ways, and Jackson, alone in the most hostile jungle on earth. The fundamental condition of writing and of study is enforced solitude, loneliness. I've been thinking about Michael Cobb, who writes of the queerness of loneliness and of being alone. And through him, I think the queerness of this binding, these men bound together by me, is queer in me, through me. And here too, all the women who are communing with each other and with these men as ghosts, and at the same time materially real and so far from one another. Lonely we have come to study together, to write to each other, end quote. I'm into this writing and study about loneliness and aloneness. But I guess I'm also bothered by it. It is perhaps why I've been writing you letters, why I have been reading the letters of James Baldwin to his nephew, of Seeley to God and to Nettie, of N to Angel of Dust, of M. Norbezi Philip to the dead who are yet with us. I have been thinking about a theory of the letter and how it is a search for what N calls a broken claim to connection, where what is sought after and what is desired is relation. What is sought after and what is desired is that which exceeds the broken claim for connection in the service of establishing connection. And I guess I've been thinking about blackness and mysticism because there's something about the practice of noise making that Black Pentecostals perform that is so mystical to me, that announces a fundamental and deep and moving and abiding connection with one another and the creaturely world. In such a world, nothing is inanimate, everything moves and vibrates. But Western mysticism seems to be so much about renunciation of the flesh, of the social, before the possibility of discovery of the divine, of the intangible but perhaps felt world. One has to leave the flesh and one has to leave the social as a first move in order to hear more precisely, to feel more properly, before re-entry into the social in this sort of mystical tradition. We keep thinking that mystics talk about leaving the noise of the world to hear more clearly, but what would that noise have been in the medieval era, for example? Certainly not the noise one hears in the world today with electricity and cars. It worries me. What was bothering me about John of Faucamp so much, in other words, was that he had to lament. I've been reading lots of Cedric Robinson and have been moved to tears because what he establishes is connection by reorientation to direction. By just giving up on linearity, though he goes through linear history to show its ruse, its uselessness for thinking the Black radical tradition. So don't think I'm picking on Teresa of Avila or Meister Eckhart or St. John of the Cross or John of Faucamp. Robinson and the way he talks about the limits of Marxism helps me understand the radicalism internal to mysticism, even of the European traditions, but also the delimitation that they cannot get beyond, though they move in the path of such an approach. For example, Eckhart believed in the differentiation between the divine and creaturely worlds, that there is a fundamental separation that can perhaps be bridged. There is a difference immeasurable for the divine and the creaturely, but this immeasurable difference emerges from a way to think worlds that presumes difference that is categorical, that such difference could be maintained. So with Western mysticism, perhaps similar to what we find in Robinson's Black Marxism, is the beginning of racial thought and categorization, all right there in European mystical thinking. This immeasurable distance as being possible, as being possibly maintained and thus pure and categorical, would come to mark racialization to come, proceeds and functions alongside racialization internal to European thought. But I'm also thinking that Robinson kept talking about maroons, and that perhaps he's pointing to something that I've been ruminating on over and over again. Maybe marronage is a mysticism to which we can attend, a black mysticism, a mysticism of Afro-diasporic indigenous possibility. Maybe I'm after a way to think a mysticism that is about renunciation of the singular, the renunciation of individual divisible being, the retreat into rather than away from the social, the retreat into the social as the centrifugative movement away from the subject. I never wanted to possess you. I wanted to be with you. Make the fact of our entanglement audible, felt. Make the fact of our being co-constituted and otherwise space-time known. A marronage with you, in and as you, and I as otherwise then separable. Could it be? The sort of practice of marronage I'm thinking, is against John Locke's concept of possessive individualism. And it's because I've seen Moonlight and have been thinking a lot about intimacy and failure of Western epistemologies to capture excess. This, of course, is the gift of excess. So, did I tell you about the dude that I went to undergrad with that was this year flirty as hell with me, but also straight identified? So wouldn't own his affections or desires, but kept projecting everything onto me? The one that I gave a copy of The Price of a Ticket to. He said he was a Baldwin fan and I was feeling nice that day, and I bought him a copy and had it mailed to him. He read a part of it, and after he'd read some, called me on the phone, and we've never talked on the phone, just to talk about the book and other things. And he told me how he couldn't stop thinking about this one essay, Here Be Dragons, how he kept talking about it to everyone he was encountering. So of course I wanted to talk more about it with him. He's the one that after talking to him that one night for 45 minutes late at night, a week later I sent him a message joking that he disappeared after that first conversation, and he replied that he was, quote, running out of politeness with me, end quote. The one that after that comment I haven't spoken to since because I refuse to be disrespected because he can't deal with his emotions and desires. Well, I woke up thinking about him because, I don't know, that shit hurt my feelings. And I think about it every now and then. I liked him, sure, but I wasn't making things up. I know it, whatever those brief moments of intensity and interaction were reciprocal and likely overwhelming for him, but I was never too intense or too flirty. I guess it was my writing in the book something like, to my new friend, and closing with XOXO, but why are straight identified men so afraid of shit they start but don't have the will to finish? That's a real question, y'all. Then it hit me after watching Moonlight. It was the intimacy that bothered him. What's been so astonishing to me about intimacy and the ways folks talk about Moonlight is this. Intimacy means that connection is possible, that sexuality isn't something that can be explained away with biogenic conceptualizations of the human, of evolutionary development. Intimacy means that there is something ephemeral that is sought after and desired that cannot be put into charts and metrics. It cannot be measurable in some sort of scientific way. And this, it seems, is perhaps a problem specifically in a world that presumes that science can answer all, a world predicated upon disciplinary knowledge, predicated upon what Sylvia Wynter calls the coloniality of being, power, truth, freedom. I'm just trying to say, we exist in a world that much rather have a scientific explanation for sexuality, but intimacy is such that it resists such easy analytics. And this intimacy is a gift. It is the gift of resistance. It is the gift of being resistant to being incorporable into Western knowledge regimes. And truth is, I enjoy talking to him because I've been feeling alone and lonely, especially a lot lately. Though you and I have been talking more, it's still not the thing we had or could have, and so loneliness still seems to creep up on me in ways that I'm not in favor of. And this isn't to say that I don't enjoy my friends, but that their relationships are not sustenance for me. They are integral to how I've been able to live. But this is too much about me. I enjoy talking to him because of my feelings of aloneness that often feel like a sort of dispossession of, or a displacement of sorts. And I've been exploring mysticism because I don't want to be alone or lonely, and was intrigued by the call and the almost forced inhabitation of loneliness. That's what I've been thinking. That's why I've been reading Eckhart and Jonathan Camp and all those others, to be honest. But then there's intimacy, and it seems to me to be against the kind of forced solitude I've been reading in terms of mysticism. Tell me if I'm wrong, I guess, but maybe intimacy is also about entanglement. Quote, quantum entanglement is a physical phenomenon that occurs when pairs or groups of particles are generated or interact in ways that such quantum states of each particle cannot be described as independently of each other, when the particles are separated by a large distance. Instead, a quantum state must be described for the system as a whole, end quote. Though quantum entanglement can be measured, what I'm into about it is the way entanglement means that divisibility and separability emerge from within certain epistemological assumptions about the world and its behavior. Such a world and its assumptive logic is normative. But what of the non-normative? Quantum particles literally queer. They defamiliarize the so thought familiar through otherwise relationality, what is considered to be normative interaction. Little, Chiron, and Black all entangled to, with, and in Kevin in all three stages of the film Moonlight. It's about connection, and I write about possibility because I've been so disappointed in the world in both big world historical ways and mostly on the level of the personal. How much is one supposed to endure? How much is one supposed to go through is something that I think about a lot. It isn't easy talking about these things that I write about because they emerge from such disappointment. Everything said, everything written, in search of connection. But admittedly, I'm still learning. A. Dear Moth, you never believe me when I say that you're beautiful, though I suppose I said it a bit too late. I know you think the priesthood is what you desire, and I'm not here to stop you. Never have been. But I think and have thought that you were beautiful since the first time I saw you. Since the first time you opened your gap-toothed smile to me. Hesitant, speculative, hopeful. The way I felt when I first met you, astonishment might be the closest thing to it. The best way to describe what I felt. Astonishment as a kind of intensity of sense experience that is, at the same time, a rupture into space-time, making time and space otherwise than Newton. Look at this article. It says that particles' current behavior is based on their future state. Quote, quantum laws tend to contradict common sense. At that level, one thing can be two different things simultaneously and be at two different places at the same time. Two particles can be entangled, and when one changes its state, the other will also do so immediately, even if they are at opposite ends of the universe, seemingly acting faster than the speed of light. Particles can also tunnel through solid objects, which should normally be impenetrable barriers, like a ghost passing through a wall. And now scientists have proven that what is happening to a particle now isn't governed by what has happened in its past, but by what state it is in the future, effectively meaning that at the subatomic level, time goes backwards. To bamboozle you even further, this all should be going on right now in the subatomic particles which make up your body, end quote. Your smile astonished me, opened me, made me feel some future, some moment to come, as if it already happened. Your smile, it's as if the gap caused me to fall into a black hole, a space of opportunity. Your smile made me quiver. Your smile, it illustrated what I think science only wishes to approach, that when I saw it, I knew you before I knew your name, knew you and knew us, as together, as entangled, from some hallucinatory effect, from something bearing down on me from outside me. Your smile, ecstatic force, that which was outside myself caused me to withdraw into it, and by withdrawing into it made a different relation to space-time not only possible, but plausible, not only possible, but desirous. It's been years, yes, but it feels like yesterday. It wasn't so much that I thought you the most beautiful thing in the world. I did. And it wasn't that I thought our conversation was so wonderful. It was. That did it for me. It was in this. That first time we talked at the diner, I mentioned ever so briefly that Just Above My Head is my favorite novel, that I've been meaning to buy an original copy of it because the one I had was so marked up, but never had the opportunity to purchase. And, of course, I'd wanted an original copy of the book, But then we moved on to another topic, and you're having taken that information and lodged it in somewhere far away in the recesses of your mind, only letting that knowledge flourish once again when, months later, we were arguing at that same diner that night after having spent too much time together that day and that evening. And the argument, of course, was not an argument at all, but the closeness and warmness of us to each other. You allowed that knowledge to come back to you to the surface when I said to you, quote, "You never listen or pay attention to me. I already told you that," end quote. Did I know that you would go home that very evening, go online, find a copy of the original printing of Just Above My Head, and purchase it for me? And then you scribbled in handwriting on the front to prove that I both listen and pay attention to you, Moth. It was that did it. That attention given to things that I did not even attend to as acutely as you did scared the shit out of me. What was I supposed to make of someone who could detect in me the traces and remnants of hurt and pain that I had not realized I enunciated? I did not know that I had spoken so freely after all. Of course, now that I think about it, I said nothing different than I'd normally say or do when spending time with someone who I was interested in. It was that you had an inclined ear toward those things. You not only heard the surface, but into and around it. It was in the pauses and the breaths that I took, I think. It was in the pauses and breaths I took, I think, that let you hear into the silence that was pulsating with meaning. But of course you heard the contours and heard the melody. It's like you opened up what was in the statement, like pulling out the drawbars of a Hammond B3 organ. Your buying that book for me made me know that you would be attentive to me in ways that would delight and annoy me. Isn't it the case that we want someone to fawn over us until they do? And then we think that there is something wrong with that person to give us so much attention to us in the first place? That perhaps that attentiveness will mean that they will always detect in us that which we want to remain hidden? At that moment, you were more than beautiful to me, and more than beauty itself, more than the concept of the beautiful, and it scared me. It was the book, it was the scribbling inside, it was that you knew how to make me overjoyed. But if that joy was possible, then surely lurking around the corner was disappointment, or so I convinced myself. Astonishment is like that. You are confronted with something awe-inspiring and inducing. You are taken up in and assumed by that confrontation, dwelling therein, listening to its music, abiding and loving and existing in some other temporality, some other zone of time where time is not, but what is given is and is as something constantly being taken away. Of course, what was being taken away in that infinitesimal encounter and confrontation was the idea that loneliness and brokenheartedness are perpetual and unending. Meeting you, I knew that shit was a farce and that happiness existed. Right in front of me, smiling gap-toothed always. That smile, maybe that's the moment of entanglement, the moment of being taken up and joined with another. It's a sort of pairing that cannot be produced by laws and churches, but only by intimacies that emerge from the soon-to-come that determine past nows. But of course, that's only one side of astonishment's encounter. You can't stay there forever, can you? Who knows? I'm pretty sure no one stays there long enough to find out if you can actually stay there. So then we're released to the other side and we run far away from that which prompted such feeling in the first place. By the time I figured out that kind of experience was possible and that it could be ongoing, you were gone and talking about becoming a priest again. Again as if for the first time. And thus the ongoing silence to anything emotional I said to you that you enacted. You know, I still look at your copy of Just Above My Head almost daily. It's on the bookshelf underneath the television. Do you know that I often pick it up off the shelf, thumb through it as if there is nothing written in the front flap, such that every time I open the front flap I feign surprise? Or not really feign, because I'm always surprised by your knowledge of who I was and am and would be, who knows, demonstrated by your scribble writing, and still be astonished. Your smile was like the announcing that the soon-to-come possibility was bearing down on the now. What is time and what is space in such a set of potentialities? Some entangled reality, some entangled materiality, across and against and beyond space-time determine a possibility of now love, of a preaching now about love, to preach and compel love in order to get to the prize, a prize that's been determined, already won. And I don't know, it's beautiful to me. I think maybe astonishing too. Maybe that smile of yours was sent from outside space-time. You know, Muslims got this belief that gap tooths are sacred, that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had a gap right in the front of his teeth. And you are so holy to me. It's like a move in a different mood and dimension. Come over. Come see me. Please, soon. A. Dear Moth, there are worlds, and the fact of our experiencing them is because we are impossibly vulnerable and open as a way of life. The central nervous system is not enclosed in the borders of the so-called body, but it's out there in worlds. That which is central is a kind of ecstatic force, ecstatic being, existence beside or otherwise than what we call the self, such that the idea of outside and inside needs to be thought against, maybe entangled, maybe a system. It's been a while since I've heard from you. You sent that text when you returned home that you shouldn't have come over, that you're sorry that you cried, that you love me and you can't. And then all this talk mostly about God. And it's taken me some time to think about what you wrote to me about God, and I had to think about and respond to it, so here. What quantum physics is discovering is a redefinition of space-time as nonlinear or separable. If this is the case and God is, as you say, an unfolding, then this God would be the unfolding of all that is and is not detectual by sensual capacities. This would mean that there is something behind or that withdraws from even the quantum understanding of space-time, some otherwise sort of relation, some sort of unity and convergence that would undo even the concepts of unity, convergence together, sociality, unfolding, enfolding, undoing, doing, action, and reaction. Does this even make sense? And what would that mean about love? Because don't we think of love as the unfolding of possibility in space-time? Love as approaching a kind of sociality of experience? But then maybe also love would be that which necessarily withdraws through approach the very possibility of possibility. Because what does it mean for something or nothing to be of, from or mark in relation to possibility if it recedes from sense experience? Love as the sense experience beyond sensuality, beyond or withdrawing from or below or sharing some other kind of relation to experience. It's like when you said, you are more than someone else's negation, someone else's exclusion. Because we exist in and as excess, as that which cannot be contained or engulfed or enclosed by anything, negation or exclusion included. It's as if we are the flesh of what quantum mechanics is discovering. I won't settle. I will continue to pursue what at times feels like, at most like a hunch or a vague sense of possibility, or perhaps even a pulling towards, something sort of like a dream trying to be pieced together after having awakened abruptly and having felt deeply, but losing such feeling second by second, though you know, and though you intuit, and though you have not attained, you press in such a direction that will fulfill a promise to come. And I will continue precisely because my now moment is dictated by some moment to come, sensed as verve and visitation from outside the possibility of space-time. I won't settle because it happened, because it happens, because it is happening, because it will happen. What I'm trying to say imprecisely is this. I think I love you. Resume.
She called you. You missed the call.
Oh no, play. It's because I'm in Canada. Oh. Don't do this to me. Let's see.
Of course, you telephoned.
Yeah. Okay. She sends him a text message. That's all that happened. You should all see An Oversimplification of Her Beauty. That's a beautiful film. What I'm trying to say imprecisely is this. I think I love you. I watch An Oversimplification of Her Beauty, as you know, a lot. And I get why she sent the text she did. Why it was a question that was also a statement. How it was tentative but also very sure. I think I love you. I finally understand because you, Moth, make me feel what I've been afraid to say but I know to be true. I have never felt this way about anyone in my life before. And I know that sounds like a platitude, but what I mean is this. You are, and my feeling for you is black noise, is static, is sort of the background against everything I do occurs. I don't consciously think about you all the time, no, but I feel you. When I sleep, when I wake, when I cook, when I sing, as I breathe, as I breathe, as I breathe, it's you. A sort of quiet omnipresence, a soft enclosement. You are the sound, almost chant-like I hear sort of far off in the deep recesses and furthest reaches of my flesh. and yet you feel more than near, closer than anything I've ever known. I do not think about you as much as I think you. It's as if you are bound to each thought, whatever thought that might be, that I think. It's as if you are the ground of all that is to me. I don't mean this in a way pathological or that I cannot exist without you, that I have some sort of weird codependence that is more about ego and narcissism than it is about your well-being or mine. I mean simply that I desire you and I feel that we are one. It's like what I said to you in that text message not soon after meeting you. It's as if in and with you I'd found the voice in my head to which I was constantly searching, the voice in my head to which I was always replying. As if meeting you confirmed that we already were, that we already was, as if meeting you were the promise and the fulfillment of the promise, a breakdown of the simultaneity through a space-time rip or tear or break. I understand David and Jonathan being knit together. Quote, unlike weaving, knitting does not require a loom or other large equipment, making it a valuable technique for nomadic and non-agrarian peoples, end quote. They were knit together and were movers, nomads or wanderers, and I'm thinking about David's psalm, talking about walking through the valley of the shadow of death but not fearing. And though this 23rd psalm is about the Lord, I wonder if it's also what had been if it's also about what had been backgrounded, David's being knotted up and tangled with Jonathan. And what I mean is this, I think I love you, no question mark. And what I mean is this, I have not stopped telling everyone about you, the joy you have brought and continue to bring me. And what I mean is this, there is not only you in the world, but you are my paraclete and I, yours. And what I mean is this, I want a consensuality with you, a continued consent to be together. And what I mean is this, entanglement might be the best way to approach what I feel, that once joined together we are a system. We maintain our uniqueness regardless of the nearness or farness, regardless of a space-time separation. We are indivisible. We renounce the individual for the social, for and with and in each other. And what I mean is this, it's as if dream worlds were hallucinating otherwise universes as possible, and mine and your dream worlds outpoured towards each other, enfolded into and collapsed within each other. And what I mean is this, it's kind of beautiful and mostly scary because I don't know what this means and haven't since I first met you and am unsure what to do. I do not want to control you. Your consent is more important than my desire. And what I mean finally is this. I don't want you to go to seminary if it means you will not and cannot be with me. I want to support you, but why the priesthood when they require celibacy? My stomach churns at the thought of us not being together. I literally get sick at the thought. Your t-shirt that you left here when you were last here I have not yet washed because the smell of sweat and polo cologne and you linger on in it. Don't do this, please. I hate to even ask such a thing. Don't not go for me, but please don't go. I know Saint Sabina was formative for you, that you chose that space of care and were so compelled you were able to get your parents to join too. I know that you want to continue the tradition of the folks there, that you think that the University of St. Mary of the Lake is the place which you are called to study for a master's degree. But do you really think this will make you happy? Can you do justice work in preaching from another tradition? I need you too. Until the space-time beyond when where I no longer feel you, which will never be, A. Dear Moth, you misunderstand me when I say that there are worlds and I am only talking about love, or when I say that I am entangled with you and your smile, that it did something to me. You misunderstand me because I think we are an example, a minuscule example, of course, of things otherwise. I'm thinking of blackness as the marking of alternatives. I'm thinking of indigeneity, too, as that marking, and queerness. And I'm thinking of these as mutually constitutive categories, as non-divisional, not in order to liquidate and evaporate difference, but in order to say that Western logics of thinking relation have been imposed on us. Anyway, what I mean is blackness would also have to be against linear time, and indigeneity, and queerness. These would not be additive, but a different relation. This different relation isn't created by Western epistemologies, but is the resistance to that categorical coherence. These would not be identities, then, no matter how hard we try to turn them into property, but would be the resistance to identity. They would be, instead, ways of life, ways to live, ways to relate to one another against the imposition of identification as that which would sever and divide us. What I mean is blackness and indigeneity and queerness mark an otherwise space-time. The space-time would not be linear in its trajectory or force, And I'm thinking, what if the encounter with black being and with indigenous being and with queer being is also a confrontation with a kind of refusal of entanglement, an encounter with the confrontation of the fact of entanglement, the fact of an encounter of a different and very much material because imagined and produced disruptive epistemology. Just thinking. A. Dear Moth, I was driving and my random shuffle played Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians, Movement 11. And it was the first time I heard it in the long time, and it was so moving, the bass notes, that which gave it a sort of grounding, that I listened to the entire album as if for the first time. And I've got to say, playing the entire thing and arriving at Movement 11 made me tear up in the car. The entire album is about movement, about incremental change and difference, so you end up wondering how you got from the beginning of the 1 hour and 8 minutes to the end of the album. Between here and there, between now and then, were worlds of sonic possibility. It could have been otherwise. It's as if I slipped into a crack the size of a neutrino, but as I kept falling in, I experienced expanse as the mysterious beyond of space-time, a beyond that is not predicated on, but fundamentally an alternative to Newtonian physics and the conceptual linearity for time and space. I felt finally prepared to hear what was in Steve Reich, because I had been finally thinking and talking and really feeling Black Pentecostal music so much more, even when it doesn't emerge from a Black Pentecostal church, like the singing in Mount Dewell Baptist Church of He Set Me Free. Sorry. It's like what Nathaniel Mackey says about dreams, how one doesn't really know how one moves from scene to scene. One just ends up in the middle of them. That's how it feels listening to Steve Reich, or yes, listening to Mount Dewell Baptist Church. It's a mysticism, a Black mysticism, a mysticism that requires a renunciation of the one in favor of becoming plural, or not really becoming but acknowledging the fact of plurality as the grounds of our existence. Music, Steve Reich announces, is for 18 musicians. The singing at Mount Dewell Baptist Church is a collective improvisational project. They retreat into rather than away from the social. Maybe I'm just making it up, but it seems like a refusal to be alone, such that the categorical distinction between alone and lonely evaporates away. I've been thinking a lot lately that trying to argue about doctrine and theology is important, but the Black church is so much about feeling. And I think we have to talk about hurt feelings in clear and precise ways. Doctrine and theology mark a certain epistemology, but it seems that Blackness is one of feeling, not against thought, but as thought. This is not an anti-intellectual argument. I keep thinking about this quote from the introduction to Sister Outsider. Quote, The white Western patriarchal ordering of things requires that we believe that there is an inherent conflict between what we feel and what we think, between poetry and theory. We are easier to control when one part of ourself is split from another, fragmented and off balance. There are other configurations, however, other ways of experiencing the world, though they are often difficult to name. We can sense them and seek their articulation." End quote. Feeling lonely, feeling alone, wanting connection, these are all about ways of existence that are about feeling as the grounds of experience. And being between, slipping into a crack the size of a neutrino, and experiencing worlds of affective encounter is also about the unfolding of feeling and the flourishing of mood. Can Black study do this sort of thing? Dear Moth, what if Black performance is about the heightening of one's awareness of the flesh, that what is not a loss of feeling or paralysis, but is an alternative to feeling as an individuated and individual thing? What if Black performance is against the process of subjectivity and the making of the possessive individual? I've been reading Sylviane Diouf and what she writes about Maroons in the United States, and it resonates. Quote, "Borderlands were spaces of freedom that provided what enslaved people were denied elsewhere: autonomy, mobility, enterprise, a sense of physical security, freedom from scrutiny, control over their time and movement, and access to varied foods. They stood at the intersection of three worlds." End quote. And if three worlds, then not only ever, but always more than three. If three worlds, then always an exorbitance of worlds. Maybe Black performance is at the border of the between, in the break. Marinage is the practice of being ever between and as between. Marinage is the practice of being ever and always between. Borderlands are between, and as between mark relation. Being between worlds is where worlds were made. We can consider this between then the enactment of otherwise possibility in the flesh, and the refusal of civil society, and the making otherwise at the border. Such a making wasn't about or predicated on notions of home and dwelling, as produced by possessive individualism and the acquisition of private property. This was an otherwise politics, an otherwise social. And I'm thinking about Maroons and Blackness because I keep returning to the music, to Steve Reich, to Mount Dewell Baptist Church, and all the stuff I find on YouTube. Hammond B3 organists in Black Pentecostal churches are some of my favorite folks to listen to and to engage with because they do what Maroons did. They carry the insistence of Black performance. These organists call the space between choruses and verses passing chords, or sometimes turnaround chords. The passing chord or the turnaround chord is whatever occurs between the singing, sort of. So in a way, these chords are also spaces that mark betweenness, spaces where in radical thought of improvisation occur, where improvisation as a means to comment upon that which has come before and that which will come after happens. It's what he plays after they finish singing that actually is the most important thing, I think. But yeah. He doesn't want to stay in any resting place, but he wants to continue playing, wants to continue to dig deep, to go underneath, to explore the between and the past. I asked a musicological friend of mine to explain what he was doing in terms of music theory. He says, quote, "This dude's harmonic vocabulary is wicked. It's impossible to put a name on it because he literally does everything you name. Suspended harmony over a secondary dominant, augments another chord to a great 11th. He does a diminished arpeggio in that same area. You could mention any of those things, but I wonder if simply saying something like, he uses an intensified chromatic palette in order to create a more biting dissonance would suffice." My response was, it doesn't seem to be about music theory at all. It's so murky and playful and inventive that it sort of resists its own being named. And that's one of the things I've been trying to theorize lately. And this, the way you talk about it, underscores that sort of drive in gospel musicianship, end quote. Like Marinage, the sound is about the practice. It's about the preparation. It's not about home or settling. It's not about property or ownership. It's the refusal of renunciation of individuation and the cause of becoming part of an unbroken circle of sonic possibility. This is sonic possibility, in black, a way to say love. Last one. Dear Moth, the occasion of the political climate, the occasion of the old but for many new thing about politics and disorganization gave me a sort of explicit example. This is what I meant by renouncing the one for the many. Oops, sorry. Pause, y'all. Okay. These are folks that own and work at bodegas in New York City. All kinds of folks gathered together to argue in favor of their flesh, for the protection of their collective, improvisational, non-divisional, non-singular identity. They moved and worked in the favor and protection of a non-liberal subjectivity, and intersubjective otherwise as possible. Look at the sort of gracefulness with which they stand, then bow, then bend. Listen to the quiet that makes the sound of the wind and street noise apparent, a quiet that is not about the evacuation of sound, but a refilling, an indwelling of otherwise sound. Listen to how in that silence is the anticipation for the sounding out, the call to bend again. It's beautiful to me. They withdrew into the world, into worlds, and made themselves available and open by retreating into the outside. There in the outside, they found through performance the secret place of lowliness, the secret place of blackness. To echo a friend a bit, lowly against exaltation, they withdrew into the clearing. And there they worshipped. They ascended into descent and into descent. They left the bodegas and made themselves secret in public, and in such doing undid the distinction between private and public. They made apparent otherwise in the flesh, in the then, now, soon, and whenwhere of space-time. Entanglement entangled. They were not lonely. It is a mysticism of the social, the mysticism of sociality. I've been listening to my breathing a lot more as I sleep. Or not necessarily listening, but have become more aware of it as a sound, as making noise, as displacement continually. I listen as I sleep or as I run on the treadmill or even as I walk down the street. Something about the constant movement of air in and out, in and out. Something about how we have to keep going to keep alive. How it is a biogenic fact. How flesh needs air to revive itself and sustain itself. That something from the so-called outside's got to come in and dwell in and with us. Maybe the descent of the Holy Ghost was just making this explicit. What keeps us alive and what holds us in embrace of the living is something available in common and collective and social outside oneself. It is ecstasy in the most explicit sense. And I get this feeling as I watch these people pray in the middle of a city, as I watch them pray as staging protest. They're praying from positions physically and from stations of life, sort of theologically and philosophically, that are considered in the United States to be discardable, unnecessary, and in need of conversion. But what they're praying in the sort of secret place of blackness shows me is that they breathe, and in the fact of such breathing, we should cherish it. I'll say more soon, but this is getting to be too long. Thank you.